Hello and welcome back to the Innovate Eco podcast. I'm your host, Rob Regglesworth, and welcome back if you're returning, and hello if you're here for the first time. This is the podcast where I interview founders who are building businesses to tackle one of the many environmental problems and challenges that we face. The aim of the podcast is to try and inspire more people to start businesses, or also, if you're already starting to build a business, to kind of build a collective of founders who can learn from each other so that we can build solutions and tackle the environmental problems that we face, because I really think that is the best chance we have of doing so at the speed and scale that we need to do as well. On that note, I've also started on the side of the podcast, kind of alongside it, a new newsletter called the Ecopreneur Collective, and that's really building on what I just talked about there. So trying to bring together founders or people that are interested in starting a business, tackling these problems, and where we can share information. I'll be putting out my thoughts as I build my own business, No Longer Known, and I'll be inviting along other subscribers to share their thoughts and really try and build this collective movement. So that's the plan. If you're interested, it's Ecopreneur Collective at Substack, and I'll leave a link in the description below. That's enough of that blurb. I'll get on to today's episode. And today on the podcast, I'm joined by Sylvain Vaquer, who is the CEO and co-founder of the company Mosaic Earth. A little theme running through the last couple of weeks or this month. I had Wild Mosaic, John from Wild Mosaic on last episode, and then this is Mosaic Earth. So they are not affiliated with each other or anything. It's just a coincidence, but kind of working in a similar space and trying to tackle a similar challenge, really, and that is the biodiversity crisis and nature wide nature loss. And as we get into in this episode, Mosaic Earth are really tapping into this emerging requirement and desire from governments, from businesses, to really understand what their impact is on nature and to try and do something about it, and to try and mitigate those impacts and to compensate for those impacts so we can get to where we need to get to and restore and conserve the precious nature that we have. As we get into this episode, Sylvain comes from a strategy background, and he really saw a need to build something in the age of technology, of AI coming through, that could help scale this problem and do so in a cost-effective way. So what they're building at Mosaic Earth is a tool to, ambitiously try and empower, they say, 1 billion surveyors eventually is their mission. But they are trying to get technology into the hands of ecologists, but also local communities. It might be landowners, farmers, whoever it might be that wants to analyze biodiversity data and to try and do it in a really accessible way, utilizing smartphones, missions, as they call them on smartphones, where you go out, capture data, and then it uses AI models to help analyze these large data sets that are coming in, and to do so in a way that's transparent and verifiable. So it's a really cool solution, something that taps into the rise of AI, but using AI for something really good. And as we'll get into in this episode, it's not about replacing the humans. In fact, it's about empowering more people who maybe don't have the really niche expertise, but building with the experts and those who do have that expertise, and then giving the technology to more people who stopping having to travel around the world, for example, for ecologists, and meaning that local communities can get involved in the data capture as well. But yeah, we get into all that in loads of detail in this episode, so I'll stop rambling on. We also talk about other stuff like the fact that Sylvain's just become a new parent, and the challenges of building a business alongside that new challenge. We also talk about the new era of building a business with AI, and how that actually you can run with a much smaller team now, and the advantages that might bring with it for anyone out there that's thinking about building something. That barrier to entry really is lower than ever now. And we talk about what they're trying to build at Mosaic Earth, why, and how it's going, and what the plan is. So all that and much more in this episode. I hope you enjoy it, and I'll be back at the end with a few more words. But without further ado, Here is my episode with Sylvain from Mosaic Earth. So, hey, Sylvain, it's great to have you on the podcast today.
Hey, Rob.
So, I want to start in maybe a slightly different place to usual. And firstly, because congratulations is where I'll start. You've become a father, a dad recently, very much like myself. You're a few months newer to the journey than I am. As a colleague said to me quite brutally when I had mine, I was like, "Welcome to the real world," he said. And I was like, okay, that's quite a brutal way of putting it. But yeah, like how is it all going? Firstly, how are you doing? How's entrepreneur and founder life, balancing that alongside your new adventure?
Yeah. I mean, it's a fantastic adventure. I wouldn't switch it for anything in the world. But I mean, it's been like, I'm going to be maybe a bit countercurrent to what a lot of people would tell you, but I think it's been going okay. Like, it's a little bit like building your company. Sometimes, like, people would tell you, like, you shouldn't think of it as your baby, but it is a
Mm,
bit your baby. And you're growing it from a little idea into something that takes shapes, that gets its own personality and voice over time. And so, like, this Elliot coming into our life was kind of like my second baby in a weird way. But my Michelle's been absolutely incredible. And I think I've got like the right support, and it hasn't been like too bad. I've managed to kind of like balance things out. I've got an incredible team at Mosaic. Like Neil, my CTO and co-founder, like has been there before in his previous business, and I think being able to empathize with what it means as a founder, he straight away told me like, listen, Sylvain, like, this is fantastic news,
mm.
and we'll manage it. Don't worry about anything. Take the time you need. And I mean, when you've got that kind of support, this is like, it makes things much easier. And it makes like the good moments like much better. And the moments where you get a bit stressed, or when the baby is crying all night and you're tired in the morning, things like this, like you forget about those like much quicker.
Yeah, so there are the pros as well, like as you say, there's kind of the benefits and learning. You can learn, I guess, from raising a baby, how to raise a business, and how from raising a business baby, how to raise a baby a bit as well. I really like that analogy.
Yeah. Well, it's obviously a very different, but I think there's a little bit of that. And the way we're building Mosaic, like we're trying to think very like carefully about how Mosaic, independent of like the people behind, like show up to the world.
Mm,
What's the voice of the business, like how it should talk to kind of like its audience as an entity, as a thing. And so I've been trying to and encouraging the team to think a little bit about, okay, how do we actually like develop this into an entity that can resonate with as many people as possible, that represents our values and all this type of things. And so like there is some similarity in this a little bit. How do we grow something to have the maximum impact in the world?
yeah, I think I'm thinking about a startup like a family as well, in a way. Yeah, yeah.
I haven't been as I'm not thinking. I haven't put like a business plan for my child.
Yeah, so he hand the business plan to the child, yeah, straight away, and be like, or to your wife, and be like, here's the plan.
It's all laid out. There's a master plan.
Oh, amazing! Well, I'm glad to hear that you're doing well, and that everything's good. It is for me like it's been, yeah, unsurprisingly life changing, but it's been really positive and fun, and yeah, completely changes everything and different, but it just puts a different perspective on things. And someone was asking me who's about to become a father, who's also got a business that's quite young as well in this space, like how I'm finding it and balancing all the different things that I have going on. And I was like, well, actually it made me realize where I was wasting a lot of time. And I'm like, I've got even better. I thought I was quite good at prioritizing time before, but now I'm like even more brutal with when I'm doing something that's like, it's okay to relax and procrastinate, but not just for the sake of it. And I really do. I found extra half hours and extra hours here and there, which I didn't realize I had before. So it's obviously possible, and loads of people do it. Loads of founders I've had on the podcast, interestingly, either used having a baby as a reason to finally start that business. So even, potentially
Really?
even more like, yeah, I've had multiple founders on the podcast that their reason for finally starting that business idea they had was because they had a kid and thought, I owe it to this child to do that thing that I really want to do, which is kind of counterintuitive, isn't it? You think for most people it would be double down on the security of a job or whatever, but I kind of found that an interesting pattern that seems to have emerged for one reason or another.
No, definitely. Obviously, we launched Mosaic a bit before that, but it had been on all minds with my wife for a while. So maybe that contributed a little bit on, I need to do this now because then it's going to be really hard. But it forces you to think a little bit more long-term, cross-generation of like down the line impact of what you can do. Definitely, like it gives you a different perspective on your founder's mission and the mission for the business.
So we'll come back to that in a bit, but I wanted to go into a bit of your origin story and how you got to Mosaic Earth and what the problem you're trying to solve with the company. And we've known each other for a little while and worked together on various things, but I've never actually really asked you about where the idea came from and your work beforehand. Not misunderstood, you worked in like strategy and business strategy consulting. So I'm really intrigued to know like how that linked through, and then what that kind of background gave you in terms of like knowledge and ways of, I guess, approaching the challenge or the problem that you saw.
Yeah, no, that's a good question. So I've always had like a love for adventures and travel and all those type of things. And so I studied like engineering in France and then moved to London pretty quickly to study economics because I wanted to have a bit of a more balanced set of skills. And then I started joining a strategy consulting firm back in London that was specialized in the energy industry. And the reason for that is like I thought like that would be the best combination of my skill sets, like energy. So the engineering background would be like very useful, but it's also strategy consulting. So the business acumen that I picked up when I studied at Imperial would be also like, I could use this in that type of environment and that type of job. And I always like in the back of my mind, I always knew at some point in the future, I'd want to start a business of my own. Both my parents have liberal professions. They've been their own bosses for as long as I remember. And so that's kind of like where I wanted to go at some point. And I was like, strategy consulting, perfect. It's basically like a long internship on steroids. I would travel different places in the world, meet a lot of different people, do a lot of different projects, so solves a lot of different problems, all in a highly pressurized environment. I'll do this for a couple of years, and then that will be the equivalent of 10 years in the normal corporate world, and I'll come back and do something like nice. More focused on like building like a deep expertise in something. And I started on this journey, and so for a long time, well, at the beginning, and I don't know if you're familiar with types of kind of like career evolution in consulting, but it's quite like laid out for you. Okay. So you start first couple of years as an analyst and you hone your like analytical skills for business. You do a lot of the groundwork, and then you become a consultant. You kind of like are more exposed to your clients. You work on your reasoning and building stories and kind of like approaching, like developing solutions for different like problems. And then you become a manager and you learn how to manage teams, and then you become a senior manager and you know how to manage multiple teams, etc., etc.
So it's kind of like a little, almost like a mini MBA, almost like really quite like steroids, you say, because you're learning how to think strategically and solve problems, and then you're learning how to manage things as well.
Exactly. But so I was on this path, and at every stage gate, I was like, oh, actually, great, I've got good analytical skills now. Definitely learning how to like engage with clients and solve some like use like frameworks to solve like problems would be useful to sometime in the future, like build my own business. And then next stage gate, managing teams, managing multiple teams, like one thing led to another on my way to becoming potentially partner at my firm. And I'd been then 12 years in the industry. And so it was a long time coming. And finally, at some point, I felt, okay, like I'm in the right race. At some point, I need to take my toolbox and go and apply it to a problem that I'm really passionate about. See what happens. And that moment happened a couple of years ago. And that's when I left that previous career, took a bit of time off, and then joined a program called Carbon 13, which is a venture builder in Cambridge. And that's quite like essential to helping me make that jump, because it's one thing to found a company when you're like mid-20s and you've got your professional life ahead of you. It's a much different decision when you're maybe thinking about having a family, or already have, like in some of the other founders that you had on the podcast, as you were mentioning, you were kind of comfortable salary, like you've got used to a certain kind of like lifestyle, and switching this to build your company feels like a big risk, but doing it alongside dozens of other equally as passionate and talented mid-career professionals that wanted to do this for impact and really good reasons, made it a lot easier.
Okay. That's really interesting. I didn't realize that was the path that you took. I wanted to quickly dig into that a little bit more. So was that an in-person kind of cohort type thing in Cambridge? I'm intrigued just a little bit more about how that kind of, what the focus was of that, what you had to kind of be building, if you had to have an idea already, like, how fresh did you go into it? What's the process? I'm sure people
you don't need to have an idea. I think what the program does is bring together like a good mix of people that have both commercial backgrounds and technical backgrounds that all want to solve problem in the climate space. And then you put them all in a room, you get them to talk to each other. And it's basically 3 months of speed dating with other founders. Well, not quite 3 months, but a few weeks of speed dating to try to understand like who could be a good match for you and things like this. And then learning about what it means to become an entrepreneur. So what is step 0 and step 1 and step 2? Like tactically, what do you have to do to go from, okay, I want to do it, to actually I've taken my first step towards like incorporating my company, so putting a business plan together, things like this. So ultimately, I met some great co-founders there. Like we ended up splitting, and I brought in like another co-founder a bit later in the journey. But the process really helped de-risk this decision and the adventure at the beginning.
Wow. And so I guess that was quite specific to climate, but are there more and more of these things like popping up around the place, and do you pay to take part in it, or is there a kind of sponsorship type model?
So I don't know about other accelerators and venture builders as much as I know about this one. So Carbon 13 is quite focused on climate. Others like Antler are a bit more generalist and bigger in scale as well. They've got like iterations of this in many places in Europe. The model, I don't know if it varies across different organizations. At Carbon 13, like you would get like an initial stipend to kind of like help you. It's not a lot, but it's good to kind of like help you dedicate a bit of time if you're doing this part-time at the beginning, to try to figure out whether this is something you want to do for real. And then if you're selected through the process, so if you've founded a company through this and you're selected, they would invest in you, first check, and then they would take a fee for helping with the program when they invest in your company.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. I'm sure it varies, and I'm sure there's different asks from the venture builder or the accelerators, whether it's equity or whatever. I got a little bit into that then because I was just intrigued for my own benefit, but I'm sure that'll be useful to people listening as well, because sometimes it can feel like there's so many options out there, but it can be difficult to know what's out there, and sometimes it can feel like the only option is to just throw it all away, quit your job, and then live on pot noodle and and just do it from scratch. But there are lots of things now, particularly if you're wanting to build in an impact environment or impact space where you can get a helping hand. Yeah, more and more people do want to build things later in life or when they've already got commitment. I think I was reading the other day, like the average age of a founder, unsurprisingly, is still like 45 or something. So it's like this kind of picture of Silicon Valley of like the teenage or like early 20s founders is probably more the anomaly globally than is you'd think. But yeah, I found that interesting.
Yeah, no, very interesting.
So yeah, so Mosaic Earth then, when did was this an idea that you kind of had in the back of your mind for a while, or was it through that process of the Carbon-13 cohort that you came up with the idea? Like, when was it that was there a eureka moment, or was it more of a gradual realization that this was a problem that needed solving?
It was gradual because I lost your screen.
Sorry.
No, it was gradual. Like couple of years before I decided to do this, I started doing like a lot more work in sustainability, carbon intelligence space with my clients. And one of the things that I grew frustrated about is the more the people I was working with came to terms with the climate emergency, the more they were looking at it with blinders on.
Right.
And as a good strategy consultant, like, it irks me and people are not thinking at a systemic level. And I felt that we were bound to play whack-a-mole and solve maybe for some of the emissions problems that we're having, and then just create more challenges for ourselves down the line in how we're impacting like ecosystems and nature, and like more broadly, biodiversity, obviously at the forefront of a lot of discussions, but soil health was a big topic in the agri space, like water quality and freshwater availability is looming down the line as well.
Oh, yeah.
And so like today we've got we know all of this, we've got the technologies, the tools to do a better job. And so why not take the advantage of the momentum that we have now in solving for carbon emissions to look a bit beyond. But obviously, like, private sectors being private sectors, and generally you're quite, for better or for worse, like short-termist and looking at your P&L for the coming quarter and coming years. And if there is no strong regulatory environments, it's only like, like more pioneering or forward-looking companies that can afford to make some more longer-term moves, like what is needed. So, and also I felt like the solutions out there were not there for those organizations to use to do a better job. And then like things started moving a little bit in the market. So the global, like end of 2022, I think Global Biodiversity Framework was agreed in Montreal. Then some of the early adopters with TNFD and was picking up a little bit of steam. And it felt like the beginning of something. And that's when I've decided to actually, let's take advantage of this and let's try to go, and like right now is either too early or it's just the right moment to build something in the nature space alongside climate. And so that's when I kind of like, that was the inflection point and the reason why I started Mosaic. But that was it. There was not like an idea from there. It was like, okay, we need to build something and bring solutions. We know there is like a big gap. And then when we started digging into it a little bit more, there was multiple problems that we could have decided to solve. But I felt, well, if I'm doing this, better go big or go home. So that was my number one principle. And then the biggest problem we could sort of felt was accessibility to and affordability of site level ecological data. Because if you want to start like enabling like organizations to make better decisions that actually convert into tangible impact on the ground, they need better data. And it exists in a fragmented way, but how do you like build a system and infrastructure that makes that ground data like more scalable? And so accessibility, affordability of site-specific ecological data felt like a really great place to problem to solve, because it was also very complementary with the innovation that that was going on in the remote sensing space. So last 10, 15 years, a lot of capital, energy, and curiosity and great ideas has gone into like making space-based observation of the Earth much better. And the huge progress in what we can actually interpret and see from using satellite constellations, but also like big gap when you want to understand what happens below the canopy at farm or site level. There's always going to be a technical limitations with what you can see from space, and always like feel like you need two sources of information to get the truth. And so if you've got like a really like good top-down data set from that is satellite based, you need to complement it with an equally as good ground truth data set to either calibrate it, verify what you're inferring from remote sensing, or augment it. So that felt like the meaty problem we wanted to tackle. And then associated with this is the fact that is accessibility to ecological knowledge. Because if you have the data, the knowledge is the next step. And that resides today mostly with ecologists. And if you are considering that nature or natural capital as one of the world's most critical assets or infrastructure, ecologists are the one managing it. The same way in our old, like in current industrial world, engineers are the one managing our physical infrastructures. Similarly, like ecologists are the one managing our natural assets. But, and don't take it the wrong way, first, ecologists are few and far between. Much like we don't have enough this specialism, and the demand for the ecological knowledge is increasing very, very fast as people and organizations realize the value of natural capital. And second, it's a sector that operates like other industries operated 30 or 40 years ago. Nothing is digitalized in the way that other sectors did, because there was not this kind of like outside pressure to do so. And so I think it creates a lot of challenges. We're seeing it a little bit with BNG in the UK today, and you're like at the forefront of this, accessing that expertise in a consistent way. But it also creates a huge opportunity if we can scale the impact of ecologists. That can become one of the most important profession of the future nature positive economy. And they can be like truly systems architect of what's coming, or fail to change and maybe it gets marginalized. And that's probably not the future we want to be going towards.
Yeah. You don't need to convince me. I think this is something that I've been worried about for a long time since I became an ecologist, and would see hugely inconsistent ways of, because I'm someone who likes technology and was always kind of like thinking, how could we do things better and more scalable with technology? But not many ecologists are built like that. I think that's changing, but definitely when I started, I think it was a profession that, I guess this is to do with the fact that it wasn't valued that much. There was a lot of people that were doing it in retirement or as a second job, really. So you'd get a lot of people that, weren't that tech savvy and were doing it more as a hobby. And the idea of high quality, repeatable data sets wasn't top of a priority. So you'd get these huge long lists of species from like citizen science and people that have just been out and about gathering things, but they'd take so long to get through, and the data would be in all sorts of formats, and there'd be no way of verifying it. It's just John spotted a duck potentially somewhere within this 10-kilometer circle. Like that was the kind of level of data. So for me, this was something that was always bugging me a bit, that like, how can we ever get to a point of trust? Like alongside you mentioned engineering before. I always like that comparison, like how could we start treating nature almost like critical infrastructure. And to do that, you need data that's like an engineer would expect it. It's in a way that's repeatable, collected in a transparent way that like can be audited, like all these things.
Yeah.
So I think for me, when I heard about what you were building at Mosaic Earth, it was, yes, like the getting it into the hands of more people, and we can come on to the benefits potentially for like citizen science and stuff in a second. But yeah, for me, that trust, particularly after what's happened in some like carbon credit markets and things like that, like trust is so key. That was the big sell to me when I heard about what you were trying to build.
Yeah. Well, you were asking me like earlier, like how my consulting journey kind of led to Mosaic and how I'm using some of the skill sets. One of the things that I think influenced quite a bit the way we're building the solution is that early in my career, what I worked on a lot is developing remote surveillance and operations center for large energy companies.
Okay.
And what that meant was like bringing engineers into control rooms that before were used to, when there was an issues on certain like distributed remote asset, they would travel to site to check it themselves and fixing it and making decisions on site. And we were trying to move those organizations to be more digitalized and teaching and educating engineers to start making decisions more based on data that was either automatically collected or collected by field operators that are already spending way more time on those assets. And that might, as a result, also like have a much better knowledge of what's going on. And then manage those engineers then. So trusting the data was number one. And then managing problems by exception. So not treating everything as being equal, but certain problems becoming like being top of the list and focusing on those first. And then other problems might either be handled like later, or there may be like actually no problem, or they can be handled by people in the field that may not be like trained engineers, but have all the capabilities to actually like make decisions themselves. And then once you've got that system, the third aspects of it is, well, how can you help organizations become more proactive? Because once you've got better data, better time series for how certain, say, turbines are working and all sorts of things, how can you bring, at the time it was the very beginning of artificial intelligence, but to provide predictive models on when a failure might happen in the future, and then helping engineers make decisions. What are the steps that they can take today to prevent the failures from even happening, as opposed to then having to manage like retroactively or fixing a problem that has happened? Because this is when money is lost. This is when it becomes very quickly like much more expensive. If you can prevent the failure in the first place, it's a much more better system. So how do we bring that thinking into managing natural capital assets that are equally as distributed? You have land stewards that are generally managing or working within those environments that you could help provide better data to ecologists. And you could say, like you could work with ecologists, say, well, maybe you don't have to travel to every single site to make an assessment. Trust the data that is being collected by people that are already there, and then focus your time on the very gnarly complex problems, and then do the rest remotely. Trust a bit more like maybe algorithms that are here to help you, et cetera, et cetera. And maybe there is a world where we can even become more predictive about some of the decisions and interventions we're making to restore or conserve natural capital assets.
Yeah, I've always thought the true value in an ecologist is the interpretation and the communication of the data that's being collected. I think it's a bit of a weird. I don't know if I can think of any parallels off the top of my head, but like you wouldn't there's as much gatekeeping of kind of the knowledge of like the gathering of the information. And I think as an ecologist, trying to think why a lot of ecologists got into it because they like going out into the field on a sunny day and looking at things. looking at plants or looking at birds, whatever it might be. And I like that as well. But as you say, there's only so much of that one person can do, and this is a global problem that needs data from very remote areas. And ecology is such a geographically specific thing. Even an ecologist who specializes in the north of England is quite different to one just in the south of England, for example. So it's always been a very tricky challenge to find staff who can do that anyway. And now that this is a growing field of interest, it's even trickier to upskill ecologists. So I see it as it's really freeing up that time to do more specific things, or to do that interpretation, or a lot of what we need to do. It's come up multiple times on the podcast. It's more a communications issue than a science issue a lot of the time, and it's about talking to whether it's a farmer and convincing them they should be doing things using the data, or whether it's a big global corporation telling them that they need to change their behavior because they're in danger of a huge water scarcity issue, or whatever it might be. Yeah, I think, how have you come up against kind of interesting conversations, challenges from ecologists who maybe kind of misinterpret it? I guess this is a wider discussion point with the rise of technology and AI solutions in particular. Kind of the headlines that go out there, it's coming to take your jobs, blah blah blah. Obviously, when you dig into it, it's not quite that straightforward. So I'm intrigued to know, how those conversations have been going with ecologists with this solution, and kind of how you're navigating that, and what your pitch is.
Yeah, no, that's a good question. It's been going much better than you would think. That would be my first comment. As you said, we're a bit seeing the collision of, I think, three broad worlds. There's traditional conservation, early led or within the world of NGOs, private sector, corporates, finance, and then big tech. Sectors that, at least the first with the two others, didn't used to really interact or overlap, or even sometimes looked at each other. Not being the best friends. And so there is a first, when you operate at the intersection in the middle of the Venn diagram, it's the first communication problem, aligning expectations and objectives, so that what we do as we build this nature positive economy fits every of those three kind of categories, capabilities, and missions. Sorry, give me a second.
No worries.
And so a lot of discussion that we've been having with ecologists is what's good enough. What's the decision of good enough? Because traditionally,
sounds like a simple question. That's a very difficult question for an ecologist to answer.
In academic world, there's a tendency to want to inventarize everything. It's all about precision, being complete, and most type of things. But in the private sector world, it's about making decisions quickly based on generally incomplete set of data. And then all of this is constrained by what potentially technology can provide, because it needs to be scalable. No one is interested in solutions if they can't apply to entire supply chains, or they can't be relevant to entire industries. So there needs to be a discussion around what do we think is good enough to enable organizations that need to change to make good decisions without the cost being prohibitive, or the time it takes to get all of the data being too long. And I think a lot of people resonate with that message. We can debate where do we place the bar, but what I'm seeing is the trend today, and maybe the tendency there is an automation temptation. And so we want to do everything with satellite imageries, remote sensing, and because that's really scalable. So does that lead to an outcome that is scientifically robust if you have to make site level decisions on improving biodiversity or your natural capital, etc.? Probably not. But if you're a government that is under pressure on the cost side to roll out like regulations, like at scale, quicker, and all those type of things, well, it might be easier to scale back your requirements and say we're going to do everything using like remote sensing and some automation. And then ecologists are going to be a bit marginalized and left behind. And the outcome is going to be worse off from a scientific standpoint. And so that's why I really believe it's really, really important to bring solutions that can, one, complement satellite imageries with site level data that is as scalable as humanly feasible, and then empower ecologists to have a critical role in the nature positive transition, because they are the warrant of, they hold that ecological knowledge today, which is going to be ever so important to make good decisions for the future. So that's my pitch. There is a lot of work to do. Like I think we need to bring an ecosystem together to agree on some of those points. But I think especially with like younger ecologists or more forward-thinking ones, there's really an appetite to do more. And I think like I see a path where in 3, 4, 5 years time, an ecologist can be paid like 120,000 pounds a year. It becomes a really critical role. And it's not just, it becomes something that graduates want to do because they get to use all the latest widgets, they're AI natives, and they manage natural assets around the world.
Yeah, it's interesting to kind of almost take that zoomed out look at like, well, it's easy to think short term about risk as an ecologist, about loss of job, but actually longer term, by bringing this into the conversation, being able to have a serious conversation with big business rather than it becoming seen as this very messy, almost like a hobby as it has been seen in the past. Yeah, by professionalizing it with better data, as you said, therefore will lead to a willingness to pay for that expertise that's probably higher than it is now. It's definitely catching up, but it was always a thing. When I got into the sector, it was, a constant conversation was around the willingness to pay for these skills, because it was seen as something that was just a burden and something that wasn't really taken as seriously when looked alongside engineering or whatever other disciplines, flood risk, for example, things out there, that it was just seen as a bit of a nice to have on the side. So I think that's a really interesting way to think of it. And for any ecologists listening, is that kind of slightly, this is the direction of travel for everything anyway. And if we want ecology to be taken seriously in the world, then we have to be thinking bigger picture.
Yeah. I think it's changing. You're seeing it, and I mean, now you would have heard those numbers like a million times before. What is it, like 44 trillion of global GDP is moderately or highly dependent on nature. There is a realization of the risk associated with the degradation of key ecosystems, which means those ecosystems like need to be managed. They need to be protected, restored, and all those type of things. And who are in the front line and who are the only ones able to do this today the proper way are ecologists around the world. And I think that's a massive opportunity, and the need for them is going to only increase unless we take the wrong path and automate the things that shouldn't be.
Exactly. Like it's this empowering of citizen scientists or communities which have such a amazing knowledge, but it just isn't being tapped into, whether it's in the Amazon rainforest or the deserts of Africa or wherever it might be. There's all this knowledge that is not being captured for the uses that we need it for in that context you described. And I think that's where it gets really exciting for me, and way more exciting than some of these quick solutions that are purely remote sensing, which I do think have a space in terms of big scale planning and a country to look at its strategy for land use or whatever it might be. But for actually thinking down to site level, yeah, you need that expertise, and that's where giving this to people is really powerful. I'm intrigued, I guess, like in terms of use cases and stuff. Like I can see quite clearly the where this could go, like long term. This it could be essentially used for any species level data collection or like habitat collection, things like that. Like, how are you finding prioritizing, I guess, initially? Like you kind of, it feels like you said go big or go home. It feels like you had that like long term like vision for what the company could be eventually from the start. Like how did you navigate, like what was the first near term problem to solve, and how are you finding that? Because it must be shiny object syndrome a bit. You must get like, you must see an issue over there and be like, oh, we need to build something for that. Or like, someone gives you a phone call about something quite specific in a very specific area of the world that you need to build something for. So yeah, how are you approaching that kind of from a systems thinking point of view?
Yeah, it's one of the hardest thing for me to do is prioritize the use cases, because the good news is like, I do think everything we've seen in the last 18 months is that we're filling a key gap in the market, which means a lot of different use cases and a lot of different contexts have come to us. And so we're really good at quite a few things as a result, but now the priority is to become like 10x better than anyone else at our set of use cases. And the way to prioritize is you need a space where you're solving like an acute problem for a specific set of stakeholders or customers in a market where there's like foundations for this to scale. And so we've leaned quite a bit into the biodiversity net gain space, and more this year even than last year. And I think here there's a real opportunity because the UK is a bit of a pioneer worldwide with the biodiversity net gain regulation, one of the first like biodiversity compliance markets. And it creates like a real demand for monitoring services. And so it forces, what I'm saying, like you need kind of like the external pressure for consultancies and market actors to change. And I think this is a great example. Like you're saying, like suddenly, okay, like you've shaken the system, you're putting pressure on consultancies to deliver all of those BNG baselines and monitoring requirements, pressure on the LPAs to do continuous monitoring for 30 years, pressure on the developers to do all of the proper like pre-planning work, etc. That creates pain points, which creates innovation opportunities, which we think like Mosaic can provide a great solution for. So that's how we've been going about prioritizing. And then we also like support like a number of other use cases. And because of my background in the energy sector and extractives, like we're starting to do quite a bit of work with large mining companies and infrastructures. And I'm very interested in that space, because when you think about the energy transition, one of the most critical sector that still extract the resources that we have on Earth is gonna, like the demand for metals and minerals is gonna increase multiple folds in the next 50, 100 years. And so how do we today give the tools to the mining industry to better monitor and manage the ecosystems that they operate within,
Which are often very biodiverse.
which are
isn't it?
right in the biodiversity hotspots. And so this is one other type of use case that we're trying to prioritize, because we think there is a huge opportunity to create an inflection point in an industry that is bound to become even more important than it already is.
That's definitely. I mean, the mining industry, like you say, it's only going to explode with the technology increasing and the need for those metals. But it's an industry that's had to already start. They're a bit ahead of the game because they are in these biodiverse hotspots and the kind of right to operate in those areas. They've been required a lot of the time to mitigate and offset their impacts already. So that space is a little bit more ahead of the game. And I think, that's a good move. And there's such a good opportunity there because they're often in regions where you want that community buy-in and being able to use community, that local knowledge, but in a positive way, and give them the technology to be able to collect standardized data that can have a real positive impact. That's really cool. That's a really cool use case, I think. So interested to hear how that goes.
Yeah, I'll come back on the podcast in a year.
Okay.
Let's tell you about the progress there.
Amazing. Well, yeah, I mean, I wanted to come on a bit more to the entrepreneur side of things, and that even where we have weaved that throughout, the way you're kind of prioritizing things and thinking about things from a business perspective as you build Mosaic Earth out. And there's a couple of things I've written in my notes, but one you already touched on a bit already at the start was you talked about in a blog post that you're kind of taking this this attitude of building a plane while flying it. So I wonder if you could dig a bit more into that kind of mindset and how it's maybe helped you think about things as you build it along the way.
Well, I think we've been very lucky that when we launched the platform at the beginning of last year, we sold the idea of what it could do. A number of early adopters and customers that took a leap of faith that we would deliver what we promised at the time, where we had an MVP, but not much more than that. And that meant that through the monitoring cycle, and as we were delivering each component of the platform, so mobile application for data collection during the monitoring seasons, then the web environment and dashboard for ecologists to then remotely interpret all of that data, and then the reporting towards the end of the fall and the winter back to our customers, we build it all with them. So it was a very collaborative and iterative process as we were kind of stringing things together. And so that's been a huge, huge advantage. Because it ensured that whatever we were building was useful. We didn't have too much regret cost in building things that maybe we thought would be useful and were not, because ultimately we were basically told what to build next through our conversations with different organizations we were engaged with. So that was very, very critical. And again, very grateful for those early customers and organizations and partners that trusted us in the very beginning.
Yeah, I feel I've noticed a bit of a trend towards more companies building in that way, which makes complete sense. Just being transparent and open and going, we've got the vision, we've done an MVP, but we don't want to build. We want to build something that's useful. And then you've got that that changes the mindset of the customer of oh, I feel like they're building with me and for me and my actual problems. Rather than flip that on its head, you could have gone and spent years building something, and then you would get loads and loads of issues and feedback from customers going, this doesn't do this specific thing that I need, or they just wouldn't be as forgiving of bugs in the system or whatever it is. So it's just makes perfect sense to build it that way around if you can.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it's an emerging space as well. And so we're really trying to be as customer centric as possible. And I think it's something that was obviously quite critical in my past career. In consulting, we work very closely with clients. And I try to bring that mindset in the nature space of customer centricity, which I think was and still is a bit of a differentiator and a competitive advantage because of that communication challenge that you referred to. I'm able now to sit at the intersection of those different worlds and talk and connect the dots for the different stakeholders in a way that hopefully is valuable for the ecosystem. But it's not all as easy for people that maybe have spent their career in conservation and are trying to build a nature or a technology companies and go and sell to big corporates if they don't necessarily have that experience of aligning the messaging to what actually resonates and what are the priorities of senior executive or decision maker in those companies. Hopefully that's ultimately gonna change and groups are going to be better integrated. But that's something that's core to how we're approaching what we are building, and continue doing this, trying to engage our customers, users, partners, understand what works, what doesn't work, and try to iterate very quickly, where we can put like either it's a bug fix or it's a new functionality or new features within days or weeks, not months or years.
Yeah.
And we've had some really good feedback from people we work with, like, oh, I've told you about this. And next month, when they came back to do like another, say, plant survey or habitat condition assessment, well, the app looked widely different because we had implemented a bunch of changes.
Is that something that, I guess it's not unique to the nature space necessarily, but that subject matter experts trying to build solutions and maybe missing the mark a little bit in terms of what the customer might want, or how difficult it might be to get them to see the vision? Is that something that you think is just a broader issue with anyone who's a bit of a subject matter expert, or are you seeing that happening a fair bit in the nature space specifically?
I see it a lot in the nature space specifically, because I think, again, historically, those two worlds haven't been like communicating, and the one might say is that the core values might be also a bit different. And so and again, like amazing founders and innovators are learning to speak the other side's language a little bit.
Yeah.
But what I've seen is like some people that have been building technologies and coming from a conservation background, it takes some time to figure out how to sell your solution to, say, a COO of mid-sized companies that is only worried about cost and speed, and whether that's going to help him comply with XYZ regulation or mitigate their risk. And you might be like, well, look, like we've got the system, like you can see the animals, and it can give you like a quantification of the richness of XYZ species. But if you don't connect the dots, so okay, what does that do to me?
Yeah.
Like,
Is that going to save me any money? Yeah.
How does that help me with my next promotion? How does
Yeah.
that help me like keep the business alive for the next quarter or whatever that is? So this is, I think, quite specific to the nature space because of the stakeholder groups involved. But again, I think this is changing, and people are becoming better at aligning their messaging and narratives to really make sure they're solving the right problems for the right people and talking about it the right way.
What would be your, I guess, one piece of quick advice to anyone who is from a conservation background, who's like, I want to start solving some of these challenges and building something or starting a company, and if they do come from a conservation background or a nature background, like what would you have a quick piece of advice? Is it go and be a strategy consultant for 3 years?
No, I don't think so. I think like keep an open mind and try and have a bit of empathy for your customers and your users. Have the right number of conversation to understand what keeps them up at night. What are they? What is on the list of their top 5 priorities? What are the things that they're worried about? And then build to address those pain points and those problems. And don't go around with a hammer looking for a nail. That makes sense.
That's a good phrase. Yeah.
And so I think this is quite important. And we had organized, so we're part of the Nature Tech Collective.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we did we organized an event with them a couple of months ago where we brought in a few of my peers, nature tech founders and companies and the goal of the session was to pitch to a CFO. And it's like, because it's one thing to build your business, thinking, okay, insist on the marketing and the PR aspect of the solutions that I'm building, and this is going to be how I build my business. But I don't believe this is how you scale real change and really create an inflection point towards a more nature positive economy. You need to actually speak to who holds the budget, and we need to do a better job at selling nature tech solutions to CEOs, CFOs, COOs. And going through that mental process is like, how do I sell this to those types of decision makers and executives? Forces you to challenge, well, am I focusing on the right thing? Am I solving some of the key problems for those types of people? If not, what do I need to change? If yes, how do I communicate it to them in a language that they can understand? What are their KPIs, and how do I help them move the needle on the KPIs that matter to them?
Love that. That is very good advice. Yeah, it can work, like you say, the other way around, but it's you don't get that inflection point, and it's much harder to scale quickly if you're relying on changing people's minds and marketing. It's nice to have something that rolls downhill rather than pushing it uphill.
Well,
for sure.
you always have forward-minded people that are impact focused and business leaders, but they're not the majority. And I think if we want to move that system that has a huge amount of inertia, we need to go beyond just the pioneers.
Agreed. Before I get on to the three final questions, which I always get to round off, one last one that I can't remember if this was something you wrote or if it was something you said in person, but I remember something around you saying the future of, or how you want to build Mosaic is that, at least initially and for as long as possible, keep it as small as possible. And I found this particularly interesting and wanted to get your thoughts on, I guess, the future of business and in the age of technology and AI and things, like how you're viewing that as an early stage founder, as like having that mindset from the start, because I've seen it time and time again. I've experienced it where a company gets investment in and they immediately get excited and they're like hire hundreds of, well, not hundreds, but like overnight they can grow and grow and grow. And that of course creates a number of different challenges, and the business becomes an entirely different thing. And particularly as a founder, it's just huge challenges, people challenges, right? So yeah, I don't know where it was that you said that, or if it was directly, or if that's even true. But is that a mindset that you're applying? And do you see kind of the future of businesses being that you can scale quite significantly with quite a small, agile team now?
Yeah. I mean, with everything we've said in the last hour and a bit, there's a bit of an elephant in the room, which is we're going through an enormous technological disruption with AI. And that changes completely how you think about building a company, how you think about building technology and scaling. And so as we build Mosaic, and making it like an AI native company, we are trying to bring in some of the best practices that we can see out there and leverage force ourselves to do as much as possible and leverage those tools to increase our impact without necessarily increasing our cost in our team, because it's also participating into the way we make our solution more affordable to our customers. And then because it's affordable, it scales. And if it scales our impact. And so it's just not from it's good for it's good for Mosaic, but it also it's a way where we can scale the system more broadly. And so yes, we are always trying to challenge ourselves to see the last resort should be hiring someone, or hiring someone for the right reason, not just because we're lacking capacity.
Mm-hmm.
And before that, can we be creative about the tools we use? And so AI and foundational models and agentic systems in the background now are part of everything we're doing.
Yeah, it's an exciting time to be picked to start a company from that aspect, because although there's going to be underlying nervousness for a lot of people starting out that they're building the right thing, or what they're building can't be automated or copied by a big tech company quickly. But equally, it means that you can build quicker on a budget, and you don't need to worry about historically what building a company meant. You had to bring in a lot of people very early on to be able to scale. So yeah, it's an interesting. There's a lot of companies now that have done that are now working out how they sensitively bring AI in to downscale a bit or to utilize what they've got now in a more efficient way. So actually to be building it with that in front of you, it must be a kind of nice place to be in a way, because you don't have to worry about bringing it into an already clunky system.
Yeah, well, you have to stay because the space is changing so quickly, we have to stay very well documented so that as we're going through this exponential curve, we can ride it rather than being left on the side. I do think that, as you said, it's a huge competitive advantage, and we're at the right place at the right time. Bigger companies and more mature companies, the transformation that it would require to leverage those technologies is going to be painful and a hard one. Yeah. So I think this is really important. It is critical. And it's something else I want to say. Dropped.
Have you got a hard stop at half past, by the way? Okay, cool. I'll give you 5 seconds in case it comes back to your mind. Yeah, otherwise.
What did you say? It's not coming back. Okay.
Yeah, I've got one last question, then we'll get on to it. I was just going to ask, in terms of this year or looking forward, a few years with Mosaic Earth, what's the, if we're looking back at it 5 years time, what's the kind of, what would make you be like, yeah, this is this is what I plan. What's the kind of, what would you like to see in 5 years time, I guess?
That's a good question. I think
5 years feels like a lifetime in the way that things are moving now. So
yeah,
that might be too far ahead.
What I'd like to see in 5 years is to still be alive.
Yep. Yeah, that would be good.
Scale or impact multiple folds. I'd love to see tens of thousands, if not more, people, citizens, farmers, local community members having adopted the Mosaic data collection app to contribute and participate in building that ground truth data set and infrastructure. It could be national scale in the UK, having matured for AI models to the point where we can deploy an ecologist, AI-powered ecologist copilots to hundreds, if not thousands, of local site managers and farmers.
Nice.
So they have access to that ecological knowledge to make decisions about what they should do to manage the land better. And then have Mosaic one of the preferred tools by ecology and environmental consultants in the UK for sure, and if not, at a more global level, scale their impact and to use it to engage their customers differently, manage their time much more by exception, continue to do their field surveys, of course, but also do a lot more work in a digital environment and focus their time on solving some of the bigger problems that are in front of us. So I know it's a bit wishy-washy, but
no, that question is a tricky one, but I like it because, as you said, I try and imagine a world, particularly having a baby. I like to imagine a positive world and not, like you said, hopefully be alive. But rather than, it can be often easy to think of a world in 5 years, which is continuing to get worse and worse. So I like to ask that question because it helps me see this world full of these solutions that are thriving. Keeps me sane.
Yeah. No, I agree.
Brilliant. Well, it's been a really fun conversation, and I knew it would be, and really love what you're building and hope it does go on to grow and scale. I'm sure it will. You've got the right mindset, and kind of the team that you're building is just it from the outside just looks like the way a modern nature tech company should be built, and kind of bringing in the right people at the right times. It's exciting, and excited to see where it goes. But I have 3 questions which I've been asking all my guests from the start, really, of the podcast, which is, the first one is, and I've tweaked this one a little bit, but kind of anything you're either reading or listening to or even watching, like a piece of material that you would recommend to the people out there, either in the entrepreneur space, or it can be anything really, but something that's inspired you lately.
Like my reading at the moment is this.
For anyone listening on audio, what's it say?
Every night to get the little Sylvain,
My big playbook of
my big
nature.
playbook
Nice.
for nature. I do think it's important to, like, he's 4 months old, but I want to help him like become nature literate as early as possible. And I think it's a lost skill, as we've also like been discussing today. But so like that's my main reading material.
That's your main reading. It's the same for me. And yeah, I feel the same as well. Like really conscious of that disconnect. I see it in my friends and like who aren't ecologists and stuff, and like it really feels like there's a disconnect with wildlife and nature that's growing and growing. So I'm definitely doubling down on that.
Yeah, completely.
The second question is I always change the order of these, but I'm going to go with the business recommendation one next. The business idea, which is it started out as a way to get more listeners to start an idea if they haven't got one already, or just to throw some more ideas out into the world, because pretty much every entrepreneurial person or founder I've spoken to has like a long list somewhere, whether it's digital or in a notepad, of businesses they never got around to starting. So yeah, do you have any that you're willing to share with the world?
Yeah, so I've got a notebook somewhere. Maybe one that's I thought I'd share today is Starbucks for health checks.
Okay, interesting.
Like, I want to like the same way healthcare approach to be broken, and it's something that we should be proactive about, measuring our health, not reactive about. And we've discussed about how much like managing industrial assets and moving from reactive to proactive, same for natural asset. It's the same for the human body. It's a machine.
Yeah.
And we should be capturing more proactive data so that when it starts to be a bit of an inflection point, you can make an intervention or a decision before it becomes an actual problem. But that's not at all how the system is set up. And so if Mosaic doesn't work, I'd love to be creating a system where anyone could go around the corner, like where you've got like a Pret instead of a Pret or a Starbucks. It's like a quick health check center where in 15 minutes you can basically get all of your vitals measured for an affordable cost. No doctors, maybe like a nurse, like a lot of technology. And then you do this like once every month or once every 6 months. And then you can start seeing like time series of your health indicators. And when you go to the doctor, or like you can get like smart alerts about things being like trending in the wrong direction, and you can have a proper discussion with the doctor about steps you can take to get back on track. But that would be like a huge thing.
Yeah, I love that idea. Because you kind of got companies that have jumped to the like doing things at home through a kit and like monitoring but that's more about diet and your like I don't know, gut health and things like that, whatever it might be. Having a way to quickly assess your vitals and pick up things. I mean, I would definitely be a customer for sure. Like if it was easy and convenient and affordable, that's what it comes down to, right? And at the moment, it feels like that is out there, but it's just not. Like with so many good solutions, it's like bringing something that is feels like it's only accessible to the 1% to the 99%. So
and imagine how much money it would save the NHS.
Yeah, exactly. I love it. I wasn't expecting a healthcare one, but that's it's kind of it's the same mentality that you're applying to Mosaic Earth, right? So yeah, there's a link there. I like it. And the final one is the billboard question. So a quote to finish with, to put on a billboard you live in London, right? So in London somewhere, to get a message out there. It can be either a quote of your own or it can be attributed to someone. What would you put on there?
So I've thought about one, which I actually might use at some point, because I don't think we've dig into this too much, but a key part of the Mosaic vision that you know well is how do we make how do we empower everyone to be able to collect data in a structured way about local without needing to be a trained ecologist. So obviously, like, there is an obvious group that we can engage with, are people that are already going into nature, working in nature. But I think there is a big problem, and you've referenced it with the lack of nature literacy, which is access to nature is becoming hugely unequal. And so how do we get people that either don't have those opportunities or that have lost the sense of why the value of spending more time in nature, like back in it? So you can do financial incentives. Like, we're working in some of our project on micro payments and rewards, kind of like a Uber for biodiversity style model, like the gig economy for biodiversity and ecological connection. But also, like, I'm very interested in the mental health aspect. And so what I would put on a billboard is nature cheaper than therapy.
Nice.
Something.
Yeah, love it, love it. Yeah, it kind of, well, yeah, it's health again. It's linking health and nature again, which those two things are.
Yeah, there's maybe
really
a stronger theme than I realized there.
Yeah, it's maybe maybe becoming a father has made you think about your health more than it definitely has mine. Even though I've had less time to exercise, so it's like a catch-20. I definitely think about it.
And as we're getting a bit older, it's becoming also like multiple.
Yeah. Oh, well, yeah, I love that. And I keep saying it, one day when the podcast really takes off, I'm going to get all these billboards. So I'm just racking them up for that day. But actually, like, there's companies out there that are like democratizing billboards more now, aren't there? And you can just, like, for not that much money, you can get a billboard, because there's companies out there that will just let you do it through a digital platform rather than having to pay extortionate money. So maybe it is possible. I need to look into that.
Yeah.
You might see your billboard in like walking down a high street in a few weeks.
You want to do it well, right? Because I think we're bombarded by ads.
Well, yeah.
And that's all the time. And one of the things, like, for those positive messages, like, how can we bring art into this? So it's also not like visual pollution, but a smart use of space to pass on like a positive message, but also something that looks beautiful.
Yeah, I'll get there. Amazing. Well, thanks again, Sylvain. It's been really fun chatting as always. Have you got any, like, where can people go, I guess, to find out more about Mosaic Earth? Is there anywhere else you want to point people to? Any kind of social media or anything like that before we finish?
Yeah, so if you want to keep track of our journey, follow us on LinkedIn, Mosaic Earth, Mosaic with a Z. If you want a bit more frequent updates, we've got a newsletter that goes out on a basis. And then if you're interested in having a demo, we've got a demo link on our website, or you can send me a note at sylvain@mosaic.earth.
Amazing. Thank you very much. I'll put all of the things in the description, and yeah, speak to you soon. Cheers.
As well.
So that's it for another episode of the Innovate Eco podcast. I hope you enjoyed it and that chat was inspiring and interesting to you. Do leave comments on Spotify or on YouTube, or send me a message if you want. It's hello@innovate-eco.com. If you've got an idea for a future guest or you want to come on the podcast yourself, then do let me know. Also, another good way to get in touch is to subscribe to the Ecopreneur Collective, which I mentioned at the start of the show. And I'll be sending out regular updates through that. And there's also a way that you can contact me through there as well. And I will be back in a couple of weeks' time with another episode of this with a new founder. And I will be also posting more episodes of the Startup Diaries, where I'm building my own business with my brother, called No Longer Known. So do follow that, and also go to nolongerknown.com if you want to find out a little bit more about what we're building and to sign up to the launch list there. So thanks again, and I'll see you on the next one.